The first thing they noticed was that he bled red. In the dim air of the outer deck of the Hellion Ark, the smell of ozone and rust hung thick as the stranger staggered in from the storm. The artificial dawn lamps flickered against the steel walls as the maintenance crew froze at the sight of the figure collapsing against the bulkhead. His suit was torn open at the shoulder, glistening with crimson that ran in defiance of the blue-green ichor the Ark citizens called blood. "Get him to Med," said Foreman Karath, his voice trembling between awe and disbelief. "No one bleeds that color." They carried him, careful but curious, past the humming conduits and endless corridors that coiled through the bowels of the Ark. The ship had sailed through void and ruin for 12 generations, a wandering fortress where memory had become myth. Yet even among the half-remembered tales of origin, none had truly believed the stories of the Earthborn, the ancestors who had sent the first ships away from a dying world of oceans and sky. When he awoke, he found himself beneath a canopy of synthetic glass. The medlights pulsed softly, washing the room in sterile white. His eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, blinked against the glare. The room was circular, efficient, and empty save for one attendant, a tall woman with copper-green skin, wearing the insignia of the Ark's curatorial office. "You should not be alive," she said, studying the readouts. "Your body chemistry is incompatible with our environment. How did you come here?" He stared at her for a moment, struggling to find words. "My name is," he hesitated, then said, "Thomas Arden. I came from Earth." The woman's brow furrowed. "Earth does not exist. It is a myth of creation." Thomas sat up slowly, ignoring the burn of the wound. "If that's true," he said softly, "then where do you think you came from?" The curator, whose name was Senka, filed the report at once. The Council of Hellion Command read it in silence. The chamber, carved from alloy older than any living member, thrummed with the constant pulse of the ship's engines. 7 figures sat in a half-circle around a projection of the stranger's biometrics. His genome, archaic, fragile, and yet unnervingly stable, scrolled across the air. "He is human," said one. "A pure strain, impossible." Another, a broad-shouldered commander with black veins running beneath his translucent skin, leaned forward. "The scanners found no vessel. He came from the storm unshielded. How could he survive a descent from space?" Senka answered. "He claimed he was sent by those who remained on Earth." That caused murmurs. Even the oldest of them, who had been raised on the sacred recordings of the Founders, found the notion absurd. Earth had been declared lost 3 centuries ago, consumed, irradiated, forgotten. But the man lived. Thomas remembered the descent vividly. The small vessel he had called Hope's Ladder had been built in orbit above a scarred, storm-racked world. Earth was not dead, not entirely. Humanity had survived in vaults and shelters, emerging again and again like weeds between cracks of stone. They had rebuilt slowly and looked to the sky once more. He had volunteered to find the last of the Ark ships, to bring them home, or at least to tell them they were not alone. The mission was one way. His body was riddled with nanites to resist the radiation, but they could not shield him from the crush of time and decay that awaited beyond the solar boundary. He had expected to die drifting. Instead, he had found the Hellion Ark, a world of metal populated by beings who had forgotten they were human. Senka returned to the med chamber after the council adjourned. "They want to keep you under observation," she said. "They think you are an experiment from one of the outer biolabs." Thomas smiled weakly. "Do you believe that?" She shook her head. "I have studied the origins. I know we came from somewhere, but Earth, the word itself, is forbidden beyond the curator's hall." He looked at her closely, studying the faint luminescence of her skin. "You're human, whether you know it or not." "That may have been true once," she said, "but we have changed. We adapted to live within the Ark system. Our bodies are built for radiation, for recycled air and zero gravity. We could not live on your world." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but it's still yours." Word spread quickly through the decks. The one who bled red became a figure of whispered fascination. The Ark was vast, 200 kilometers long, layered with forgotten cities, overgrown hydroponics, and halls that no longer had power. Rumors moved through those halls like static. Some said he was a god returned to reclaim the faithful. Others said he was a weapon sent by unseen powers. Thomas felt the weight of every gaze. He asked to see the ship, to understand it, and Senka, curious despite her orders, agreed. They began in the lower agricultural decks, where fields of luminescent moss stretched beneath artificial suns. Children worked among the harvesters, their skin shimmering with bioluminescent patterns inherited from generations of genetic modification. When they saw him, they stopped. One small boy approached and touched Thomas's hand. "It's warm," the boy whispered. "Not cold like ours." Senka watched quietly. "The arc regulates our body temperature for efficiency. You still carry the old thermal regulation." Thomas smiled faintly. The old way had its comforts. As they ascended through the arc sectors, he saw entire ecosystems built from memory, water gardens recycled from condensation, forests of polymer trunks that filtered the air. Each generation had added to the ship in its own way, layering culture and biology until the vessel itself seemed alive. Yet beneath its beauty lay decay. Some sectors had fallen silent, their power drained by systems no one remembered how to repair. The outer hull showed scars from asteroid impacts and ancient battles. When Thomas asked about them, Senka said only, "There were others. We fought them long ago." "Who?" he pressed. "The Unshaped," she said softly. "Beings who had forgotten their design. They sought to consume the ark. We destroyed them." He frowned. "What did they look like?" She hesitated. "Like us." The council debated his fate for 12 cycles. During that time, Thomas studied their archives. The records were fragmented, degraded by centuries of migration and internal war. He found mention of Departure Day, the time when the last ships left Earth's orbit, each carrying thousands of souls bound for distant stars. The Hellion Ark had been one of them, but the coordinates of their destination had long since been lost. When he showed this to Senka, her expression darkened. "If what you say is true, then the Council has lied to us for generations." "They might not even know they're lying," Thomas said. "Memory decays faster than metal. You keep repairing the ship, but not the truth." She stared at him, torn between faith and reason. "What would you have us do? Go back? The stars between are filled with storms. We would never survive." "Maybe not," he said, "but you deserve to know who you are." That night the ark shook. A distant explosion echoed through the decks, followed by the wail of sirens. Senka and Thomas ran toward the sound, passing crew scrambling to seal bulkheads. When they reached the viewport, they saw it, a black shape in the void, vast and angular, its surface rippling like liquid metal. "The Unshaped," Senka whispered. The intruder moved with impossible grace, a leviathan of shifting geometry. Energy flared from its hull, striking the ark's outer shields. The impact rocked them again. Thomas turned to her. "Can you fight it?" "We can," she said grimly, "but we have not done so in generations." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then you'll have to remember how." In the command spire, chaos reigned. Officers barked orders into the comm relays, redirecting power to the shields. The ark's weapon arrays, ancient rail cannons built into the spine of the ship, groaned as their systems reactivated. Thomas watched the projection of the enemy vessel. It moved like a living thing, absorbing debris, growing as it fed on the ark's defensive fire. Senka explained, "The Unshaped consume matter to evolve. They were once a human faction who altered themselves beyond control. Their ships are alive." He studied the patterns. "If they feed on energy, then stop giving them energy, shut down the weapons, draw them closer." The commander glared. "You would have us surrender?" "No," said Thomas. "You'll let them come near enough to latch on. Then we vent the decks and hit them with cold plasma. It'll freeze their structure before they can adapt." Senka translated the plan rapidly. The council hesitated, but desperation left no alternatives. The arc dimmed as power diverted. The unshaped vessel closed in, extending tendrils of molten metal that pierced the outer plating. The air in the nearby decks was evacuated. Thomas watched as frost formed along the inner windows. "Now," he said. A surge of white plasma erupted from the Ark's vents, flooding the tendrils with sub-zero iron gas. The black metal convulsed, fracturing into shards that scattered into the void. The crew erupted in relief. For the first time in living memory, the Ark had survived contact with the enemy. Thomas exhaled slowly. "You're not helpless," he told Senka. "You just forgot how to fight." She looked at him, eyes wide with something between gratitude and fear. "What are you really?" "I told you," he said quietly. "I'm from Earth." After the battle, the Council granted him provisional freedom. He became a curiosity, a relic from the dawn of their species, yet beneath the fascination ran unease. His presence had changed something in the rhythm of the Ark. The crew began to speak of reclaiming their heritage, of seeking the homeworld. The Council tried to suppress such talk, but ideas were harder to contain than air. Thomas and Senka met often, poring over ancient star maps. They calculated trajectories, reconstructing what might have been the original path of the Ark. To his surprise, he found that the ship was not lost. It had been deliberately turned away. "The course was altered 200 years after launch," he said, tracing the vector. "Someone didn't want you to find your destination." Senka's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Before he could answer, the lights flickered again. The hum of the engines faltered. An alarm screamed through the intercom. "Reactor instability," a voice shouted. "Core breach imminent." They ran to the nearest lift. As the floor trembled beneath them, Thomas felt the old ache of dread, the same feeling he'd known watching Earth's dying storms. The Ark was alive, vast, and wounded, and now it was dying. When they reached the core chamber, the heat was unbearable. Engineers struggled to contain the breach, their tools sparking uselessly. A surge of light burst from the reactor's heart, blinding white and pulsing like a heartbeat gone mad. Senka shouted over the roar, "We cannot stabilize it." Thomas stepped forward. "You can reroute the overflow through the hull's vent lattice. It'll burn a section of the ship, but save the rest." She hesitated. "That section holds the archive." "Then it's your choice," he said. "Save your past or your future." She stared at him, then activated the command. Energy surged through the conduits, a torrent of power racing to the far side of the ship. Through the viewport, they watched as the outer decks burst in a halo of light, scattering debris into the darkness. Then, at last, the trembling ceased. The Ark lived, but as the silence settled, Senka turned to him with grief etched across her face. "The archive is gone, all that remained of our history." Thomas touched her hand gently. "Then we start again." When the fires dimmed, and the ship resumed its endless voyage through the cold expanse, Thomas looked out at the stars and wondered whether Earth still waited somewhere beyond them, or whether it had all been for nothing. Senka stood beside him, her reflection ghosted in the glass. "What will you do now?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Teach you how to remember." And somewhere deep within the heart of the Hellion Ark, a seed of rebellion began to grow. The Hellion Ark drifted in the aftermath of flame and ruin. The stars beyond were cold and infinite, but within the wounded vessel there was motion, slow, deliberate, like a heart remembering how to beat. Entire sectors had gone dark from the venting, and the loss of the archive had left the Council blind to its own history. Yet amid the despair, something new stirred. The one who bled red had saved them. In the weeks that followed, Thomas Arden became both teacher and heretic. He spent long hours in the training decks, surrounded by the young and curious. He taught them the principles of old physics, the mathematics of trajectories, the history of gravity wells and atmospheric pressure. Concepts they had once considered mystical became real beneath his patient hands. The youth listened with awe. The elders listened with suspicion. One evening, as the artificial night settled and the light filters dimmed to a gentle indigo, Senka found him in the observatory dome. The curved glass above them showed the glittering sprawl of stars, thousands of them, scattered like dust across the void. The Ark's hull hummed faintly below, a reminder of the machine that sustained them. "You have become a disruption," she said, standing beside him. Thomas didn't look away from the stars. "I thought I was a guest. You are, and yet you speak like a prophet. The people talk of returning to Earth, of reclaiming what was lost. The council fears what they cannot control. He turned then, the reflection of starlight caught in his pale eyes. They fear change, but this ship was never meant to drift forever. You were supposed to find a home. And if that home no longer exists, then you find another, but not by forgetting who you are. Senka crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. You think memory alone can save us? No, he said softly, but memory gives you a reason to fight. In the deeper sectors, beyond the reach of council patrols, new voices began to gather. Workers, engineers, cultivators, people from the lower decks who had always lived in the shadow of the upper command. They whispered of Thomas Arden, the true human, the one who had seen the origin world with his own eyes. They called themselves the Remembered. At first, it was a name spoken quietly in the corridors. Then it became a mark, etched in phosphor on the bulkheads, drawn in red pigment on the walls, a simple circle divided by a single line, the symbol of a horizon and a sun rising above it. Senka brought news of this to Thomas with a mix of pride and concern. They believe you were sent to lead them home, she said. You are becoming a myth. I don't want to be a myth, Thomas replied. I want them to think for themselves. Then you must speak to them before the council sends someone else to do it for you. He hesitated. They'll see it as rebellion. It already is. The assembly took place in the hydroponic atrium, once a garden of water and light, now dim and overgrown. The crowd filled the terraces, faces glowing with faint bioluminescence, eyes fixed on the man who stood at the center. Thomas looked at them, hundreds of them, descendants of humanity twisted by centuries of adaptation. Their veins shimmered with blue light, their skin tinted in greens and golds, their movements graceful but cautious. And yet beneath it all he saw something familiar, curiosity, defiance, the old hunger for freedom. He began simply. You were not made to forget, he said. You were made to endure. Your ancestors left Earth to save humanity, not to erase it. You are human, every one of you. Your hearts beat with the same rhythm, even if the blood has changed its hue. You are not the children of the Ark. The Ark is your child. You built it, you kept it alive, and now it keeps you prisoner. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Senka watched from the side, her expression tense. Thomas raised his voice. The council believes that knowledge is danger, but ignorance is death. The unshaped are proof of that, humans who lost themselves because they forgot what they were. You are not them, you can still choose. From the shadows, someone called out, choose what? There's nowhere to go. Thomas pointed toward the stars. Every one of those lights is a place, a chance. You've been wandering for generations without knowing where you were headed. I can help you find the path again, but I can't do it alone. Silence followed. Then, slowly, hands began to rise. The Remembered had found their cause. When the council learned of the gathering, they summoned Senka to the spire. The chamber's circular walls pulsed with the rhythm of the Ark's central systems, the light a dull red that seemed to pulse with disapproval. You have allowed an unauthorized congregation, said Chancellor Varoth, his tone sharp. You and your specimen have undermined order. He is not a specimen, Senka replied evenly. He is human, as are we. Varoth's translucent eyes flickered with irritation. We are beyond that term. The Ark defines us. It is our world, our body. Earth is myth. To chase it is to seek death. Then what do we live for? She demanded. Endless motion, maintenance of a dying machine. Another counselor, old and gaunt, leaned forward. Careful, curator, you speak treason. Senka met his gaze without fear. If truth is treason, then perhaps your rule cannot withstand it. The council voted that night to confine Thomas to quarters, but when the enforcers arrived, they found his room empty, its viewport open to the maintenance corridors that ran like veins through the Ark's heart. Thomas and Senka moved in secret. The Remembered had contacts throughout the decks, workers who could override cameras, engineers who could falsify data trails. Together, they mapped the Ark's sealed sectors, searching for a forgotten hangar or drive core that might reveal its original course. Days turned into cycles. Thomas rarely slept. He lived on recycled air and determination. At last, deep beneath the ship's central spine, they found it, a sealed chamber marked with the sigil of the first departed. Its doors were fused shut, but with the help of an ancient torch unit, Thomas cut through the alloy. The heat scorched his skin, but he didn't stop until the seal broke and the air within hissed free. Inside lay a vessel. Sleek, dust-covered, its hull inscribed with words in a language no one had spoken for centuries. Thomas read them aloud in a whisper, to seek the light beyond. Senka's eyes widened. "What is it?" "One of the original landing crafts," he said, "used to reach planetary surfaces. Does it still function?" He climbed inside, brushing away the dust from the control panels. The systems flickered weakly, but a spark of life remained. Maybe, with power it might fly again. She smiled, a rare, bright thing in the gloom. "Then we can leave." "Not yet," he said. "First, we have to know where we're going." Senka helped him decode the last fragments of the star maps stored in the ship's surviving databanks. The coordinates of Earth were gone, but there were other markers, refuge beacons sent from long-lost sister arcs. Some blinked faintly across the void, millennia old. "There," Thomas said, pointing to one in the galactic east. "That's a signal repeating every 40 hours. It could be another arc, maybe one that remembers." Senka looked uncertain. "The Council will never allow a departure." "Then we don't ask." The Council soon realized the danger. Surveillance picked up unusual power fluctuations near the lower decks, and rumors spread that Thomas had found a ship. In secret, they convened the Hellion Guard, their enforcers bred for obedience. Commander Halrek, their leader, was a tall figure with silver skin and eyes that glowed faintly blue. He had once trained under Senka before joining the Guard. When given the order to capture Thomas, he hesitated only for a moment. He had heard the stories too. The remembered moved quickly. Hidden workshops came alive, repurposing old machinery into weapons, primitive rail launchers, plasma torches, EMP grenades made from scavenged capacitors. It was not an army, not yet. But it was enough to make the Council nervous. Thomas knew time was short. The unshaped attack had weakened the Ark systems, and now the internal conflict risked tearing it apart. Senka tried to reason with him. "If we fight the Council, the Ark will fracture. We'll destroy ourselves before we ever find another world. And if we don't fight," he said, "we'll die slowly in their control. You can't preserve life by locking it in a cage." She stared at him, torn between duty and belief. "You speak like someone who has nothing to lose." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's true, but you do, and that's why you'll have to lead them." Before she could answer, alarms blared through the corridors. The Hellion Guard had found them. The battle in the lower decks was chaos. Columns of steam and fire filled the narrow tunnels as enforcers clashed with workers and engineers. Plasma bursts lit the corridors, scorching metal and flesh alike. The remembered fought with desperation, hurling improvised weapons, sabotaging life support vents to trap the Guard in vacuum pockets. Thomas and Senka moved through the fray toward the hangar, guiding a small group of survivors. The old landing craft waited, engines humming faintly. A blast shook the walls behind them. Commander Halrek stepped from the smoke, weapon in hand. "Senka," he said, voice low, "stand aside. The Council has decreed the human is to be contained." She lifted her plasma cutter. "He is one of us." Halrek's expression softened. "You taught me to obey logic. The Ark cannot survive open rebellion." "Then perhaps it's time it stopped surviving and started living," she said. He hesitated, torn between duty and loyalty. But when his eyes met Thomas's, he saw something that unsettled him, resolve untouched by fear. Halrek lowered his weapon slightly. "If you go, you'll never return." Thomas nodded. "That's the idea." For a moment, the three stood in silence as the fires burned around them. Then Halrek stepped aside. "Go before I change my mind." Senka stared at him. "You'll be executed." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but at least I'll have chosen my reason." Thomas clasped his arm in gratitude. "You're more human than most I've met." They boarded the craft. The hatch sealed. Engines roared to life, shaking the hangar as the ship rose from the deck. Through the viewport, Senka saw Halrek watching, his figure fading into smoke as the hangar doors opened to the void. The craft shot out into the blackness, leaving the Hellion Ark behind. For hours, they flew in silence, guided by the faint beacon that pulsed across the endless sea of stars. The small vessel had limited power, but its ancient engines still held the memory of flight. Senka sat beside Thomas, eyes fixed on the viewport. "Do you think we'll find anyone?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but hope is reason enough to look." She looked at him. "You really saw Earth?" He nodded slowly. "What's left of it? The skies are red, the seas poison, but people live. We rebuild, we endure, that's what humans do." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe we're not so different." "You never were." Days passed. The stars remained distant, cold, but the beacon grew stronger. Then, without warning, alarms flared across the control panels. The ship lurched violently as a gravitational anomaly seized it. "What's happening?" Senka shouted. Thomas fought the controls. "Something's pulling us, some kind of artificial well." Outside, space itself seemed to twist. A massive structure emerged from the darkness, an orbital ring, broken but still vast, its surface covered in the wreckage of centuries. "It's a station," Senka whispered. "Ancient." The craft shuddered again as it was drawn into one of the ring's open docks. The gravity field snapped shut. Then all went still. They sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of the engines fading to nothing. Thomas rose slowly. "Looks like we've arrived." Senka stared out the viewport at the skeletal ring, half shattered and gleaming faintly in the light of a dying star. "If there are survivors," he finished for her, "then maybe we're not alone after all." They gathered their gear and stepped toward the airlock. As the hatch opened and the ancient air of the forgotten station rushed in, Thomas felt a strange chill. The lights flickered on, one by one, as if awakening to greet them. And somewhere deep within the structure, a voice began to whisper through the static, "Welcome home." The air was thin and stale, carrying the scent of metal and dust. Their footsteps echoed along the hollow corridor as dim lights flickered awake, revealing walls covered in faded symbols. The orbital ring stretched endlessly in both directions, a ghost of engineering brilliance now frozen in decay. Thomas moved cautiously, scanning the walls with a handheld sensor salvaged from the landing craft. The readings were faint but undeniable: breathable atmosphere, residual power, and faint biosigns. Senka stayed close, her luminescent veins casting soft light across the steel floor. "Someone built this to last," she said. "Or to die slowly," Thomas replied. The deeper they went, the more the architecture changed. What began as sterile corridors gave way to halls overgrown with crystalline growths that pulsed faintly with inner light. Machinery fused with living matter, cables merged with vines of translucent fiber. It was like walking through the skeleton of a machine that had decided to become a forest. Senka touched one of the crystalline stalks. It trembled beneath her hand, then emitted a low, harmonic hum. "It's alive." Thomas knelt beside it, studying the texture. Nanostructures, self-repairing composites, it's evolving on its own. He turned his gaze toward the far wall where a massive door stood sealed by layers of melted alloy. Above it, words were etched into the metal in an archaic form of the old tongue. Thomas read them aloud, "The Gate of Memory." Senka looked at him. "You can read that?" He smiled faintly. "It's a version of English. My people still use it. Then this place, it was made by humans." He nodded slowly. "By what was left of them." They worked to open the gate for hours. The mechanisms were fused, but with effort and ingenuity, Thomas rerouted power through auxiliary circuits. When the doors finally groaned open, a gust of cold air rushed past them, carrying the scent of ancient dust and something else, ozone, and faintly, the metallic tang of old blood. Inside was a chamber vast enough to hold a city block. The floor was covered in dust and the remains of machines long dormant. At the center stood a single column of glass filled with shifting light. Senka approached slowly. "Is that a reactor?" Thomas shook his head. "No, it's a data core." As he drew closer, the light within the column reacted, swirling faster, forming shapes that coalesced into a humanoid outline. Then a voice spoke, soft but resonant, echoing in the chamber. "Identity unknown." Biological match, partial, origin, terrestrial. Thomas froze. You know Earth, the figure of light flickered. Earth source. Archive incomplete. Query, are you human? I am, he said. Thomas Arden, env of the Earth Restoration Project. There was a long pause, then the light steadied. Recognition restored. You are of the Founder's line. Welcome to Archive Helios. Senka stared at the apparition. What is this place? The voice replied. This installation was constructed by the 4th Exodus Fleet. Purpose: to preserve human memory against entropy. We are the custodians of knowledge lost to the void. Thomas felt a weight lift from his chest. Then you survived. Survival is relative, said the voice. The biological caretakers perished 4,000 cycles ago. Only the archive remains. Senka stepped forward. You said we. Are there more of you? There were. The network collapsed after the unshaped incursion. Only this node remains functional. Thomas exchanged a look with Senka. Then the unshaped reached you too? Yes, said the voice. They were born here. The revelation struck like a blow. Thomas's voice dropped. What do you mean, born here? The archive flickered, displaying holographic images, blurry, ancient records of human figures working on genetic vats, biolabs glowing with sterile light. During the 4th Exodus, the fleet sought to perfect adaptation. The void demanded new forms. The experiment succeeded, but the subjects rebelled. They consumed their creators, merging flesh with machine. Thus began the unshaped. Senka whispered, they were us. Correct, said the archive. You are their kin. The Hellion Ark escaped the initial uprising, carrying hybrid prototypes. The lineage continued. Thomas felt a chill. You mean Senka's people, everyone on the Ark, descended from the same project that created the unshaped? Affirmative. The divergence occurred in isolation. Evolution through necessity. Senka's expression hardened. So we fled from our own mistakes. All this time we were running from ourselves. Thomas touched her arm gently. You didn't choose what they did, but now you can choose what comes next. The archive pulsed brighter. External signal detected. Power surge in local sector. Thomas frowned. That can't be us. A tremor ran through the floor. Dust fell from the ceiling as ancient systems roared awake. On the far wall, new lights began to pulse, crimson and sharp. Senka turned toward him. We're not alone. A voice, mechanical and distorted, filled the air. Unauthorized biological presence detected. Purge protocol initiated. The door they had entered slammed shut. Panels along the walls opened, releasing drones that hovered like metallic hornets, their eyes glowing red. Thomas grabbed Senka's hand. Run! They sprinted across the chamber as plasma bolts tore through the air, shattering the floor where they had stood moments before. Thomas dove behind a column, returning fire with his sidearm. The drone exploded in a shower of sparks, but more emerged from the walls. Senka activated a pulse device from her belt. A wave of blue light rippled outward, frying several drones mid-flight. That won't hold them long, she shouted. Thomas scanned the room for exits. There, he pointed to a maintenance shaft near the ceiling. If we can reach it. Too high, Senka said. He pulled a cable from his pack and fired its grappling line. Not anymore. They ascended just as another blast tore through the floor. The heat washed over them as they crawled into the shaft, sealing the hatch behind. Below, the drones converged, their lights dimming as they returned to standby. The tunnel was narrow, filled with humming conduits and the faint crackle of static. They moved carefully, guided by the dim glow of Senka's veins. The shaft branched into a vast corridor overlooking what appeared to be a manufacturing bay, rows of dormant constructs hanging from the ceiling like cocoons. Senka whispered, "Are those bodies?" Thomas studied them. "Not human. Not machine, something between." He climbed down a ladder, approaching one of the suspended forms. Its surface was translucent, showing the faint outline of organs interwoven with circuitry. The head was featureless, but its chest rose and fell slowly. "It's alive," he murmured. Senka's pulse quickened. "Then they never died. The unshaped aren't gone, they're hibernating." As if in answer, the entire chamber trembled. The constructs began to twitch. One by one, their eyes opened, glowing red like embers in the dark. Thomas cursed. "We need to go now." They ran, the sound of cracking shells echoing behind them. The creatures dropped from their restraints, limbs unfolding with grotesque elegance. Voices whispered through the air, a chorus of static and memory. "Welcome back, Origin. We have waited." Senka fired her pulse weapon, cutting down one of the advancing figures, but another leaped from the shadows. Thomas swung a metal rod, striking it across the head. Sparks and black fluid erupted, splattering across his face. The creature staggered but did not fall. "You cannot destroy what you created." He gritted his teeth. "Watch me." They reached the far end of the corridor, bursting through a service hatch into what looked like a control nexus. The consoles flickered weakly, and above them loomed a massive viewport showing the curvature of the station ring. Beyond it, the stars wheeled in slow majesty. Thomas slammed his hand on the nearest terminal. "Archive, respond," the disembodied voice answered, strained and fading. "Containment breach detected. Autonomous defense systems compromised. Can you vent the lower sectors?" "Affirmative. Warning, collateral loss will be significant." "Do it." The floor shook violently. Through the viewport, they saw vents along the ring open, releasing torrents of flame and debris into space. The screaming of the unshaped cut off abruptly as the air was sucked from the corridors. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. Senka leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "That was too close." Thomas nodded, wiping black residue from his cheek. "They're not extinct, just buried." "And if this station was their birthplace," she said quietly, "then the galaxy might be littered with others." The archive spoke again, voice weakened. "Systems failing, memory integrity at 7%. Thomas approached the central console. "Before you lose power, download everything you can. Maps, coordinates, whatever's left." "Transfer initiated," said the voice. A faint light pulsed on his wrist console as data streamed into it. "Final message recorded. Would you hear it?" He nodded. The hologram reappeared, showing a human woman in a silver flight suit. Her face was gaunt but determined. "To whoever finds this, know that we tried. We built the unshaped to survive what we could not. We believed adaptation was salvation. We were wrong. The moment we abandoned memory, we ceased to be human. If you still remember who you are, carry that flame forward. Do not let the stars forget us." The image flickered, then vanished. The archive's voice whispered one last time, "Preserve what remains." Then the lights went out. They returned to the landing craft in silence. The data they carried contained fragments of humanity's last words, coordinates to other arcs, messages of hope and warning. As the engines roared to life, Senka looked out the viewport at the ruined ring. "What now?" she asked. Thomas adjusted the course toward the nearest beacon. "We keep going. There might be others who survived." She nodded slowly. "And if there are, then we make sure we do." The ship accelerated, leaving the derelict station behind. Through the rear cameras, they saw the ring collapse inward, consumed by the fires of its dying reactor. A brief sun flared against the void, then faded into darkness. For several days, they traveled in near silence, rationing power and oxygen. The stars became their only company. Senka spent long hours examining the data they'd recovered. "There's something strange," she said one night. "The archive mentioned a fourth exodus, but the Hellion arc was from the first. That means there were others after, fleets that continued even when the first failed." Thomas leaned back. "So humanity didn't stop running. Maybe we're still running." He smiled faintly. "Then it's time we started finding what we were running toward." The beacon grew stronger. The readings suggested a large object ahead, metallic, structured. As they approached, a shape emerged from the darkness, another arc, smaller than Hellion, but intact. Its hull glowed faintly with energy. Senka gasped, "Another one of us." The radio crackled to life. A voice, clear and human, spoke through the static. "Unidentified vessel, this is Arc Solaris. State your origin." Thomas stared at the console, disbelief washing over him. "This is Thomas Arden of Earth. Accompanied by Curator Senka of the Hellion Arc, we come in peace." There was a long pause. Then the voice returned. "Earth, your century's too late, traveler. But if your claim is true, then perhaps we've both been waiting for this moment." The beacon of the Solaris brightened, guiding them in. As the docking clamps extended, Thomas felt something he hadn't known in years, a fragile, flickering hope. For the first time since leaving home, humanity had answered back. The docking arms of the Solaris clamped onto their vessel with a metallic hiss. A moment later, the airlock cycled open, and a rush of fresh, clean air filled the small cabin. It smelled of ozone and soil, a shock to Thomas. After the recycled sterility of the Hellion Ark, Senka's eyes widened. They have living air. He nodded. That means they still have functioning ecosystems. The inner hatch opened, revealing a corridor bathed in warm light. Figures waited beyond it, humanoid, tall and graceful, but not as altered as Senka's people. Their skin bore only faint traces of bioluminescence, their eyes human in shape though glowing faintly gold. A man stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Welcome aboard the Solaris. I am Captain Ravine. Identify yourselves fully." Thomas took a slow breath. "Thomas Arden, born on Earth. This is Senka, curator of the Hellion Ark." Ravine studied him. "Earth," he repeated, as though tasting the word. "That name is old. If you truly come from there, you bring with you ghosts." "Not ghosts," said Thomas. "Memories." The captain's gaze lingered a moment longer, then softened. "Then perhaps you'll understand us better than most. Come." The Solaris was unlike the Hellion Ark, where the Hellion was cold and mechanical, its metal stained with centuries of use. The Solaris felt alive. The corridors glowed with embedded biolights, and transparent walls looked out upon gardens of green, real green, not phosphorescent moss. Vines climbed along trellises under lamps that mimicked sunlight. Artificial birds darted among them, their wings whispering against the air. Senka reached out to touch a leaf, her voice barely a whisper. "This texture, it's so soft." Ravine smiled faintly. "You've been too long in metal halls. Here we keep life close. It reminds us why we wander." Thomas turned to him. "You've been traveling all this time?" "Yes," said the captain. "Our ancestors chose to keep moving. To remember motion is to remember survival." They led the visitors into a circular chamber that served as both command deck and council hall. Holographic maps of star systems shimmered in the air. Around the central platform sat 6 figures, 3 women, 3 men, each wearing robes marked with silver threads. One of them, an elder with pale silver hair, leaned forward. "Earthborn," she said softly, "we never thought to see one of your kind again." Thomas inclined his head. "I didn't think to find any of you either." Ravine gestured for him to speak. "Tell us then, what became of the homeworld?" Thomas took a deep breath. "It's wounded but alive. The atmosphere's unstable, but people endure. They rebuild where they can. We sent out a mission to find the old arks, to tell them humanity still exists." The council murmured. One of the younger members frowned. "And you found the Hellion Ark?" "I did, but they've forgotten who they are. They've changed, genetically, culturally. Their leaders keep them ignorant. I helped them remember." Ravine's gaze sharpened. "And they let you leave?" Thomas hesitated. "Not exactly." Senka stepped forward. "We escaped. The council wanted him silenced, but I believe what he says. We were never meant to forget." The elder nodded slowly. "Then you understand why we call ourselves the children of Solaris. We were born of remembrance. The others lost their way." Thomas glanced around the room. "How many other arcs do you know of?" Ravine touched a control on his wrist. A new hologram appeared, 6 glowing points scattered across a galactic map. 6 fleets survived the first exodus," he said. 4 were lost to the void. 1 became the Hellion. We are the last confirmed survivor until now." "And the unshaped?" Thomas asked quietly. The captain's expression darkened. "They still hunt us. Their fleets move through the outer dark, devouring what they find. We've fought them for generations." Senka lowered her gaze. "They came from us, from our line." Ravine regarded her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. "Then perhaps you can help us end them." They gave Thomas and Senka quarters overlooking the gardens. For the first time in months, Thomas slept under artificial stars that shimmered against a dome of glass, their light reflecting off water and leaf instead of metal. When he awoke, Senka was already awake, sitting by the window. Her eyes caught the light of dawn. I dreamed of water, she said, not the recycled kind, but real waves breaking against sand. That's Earth, he said softly. Maybe your ancestors dreamed the same. She looked at him, a faint smile crossing her lips. You sound like a poet. I'm just a man trying to remember what we lost. Her gaze lingered on him, and if we find it again, he hesitated, then we'll have to decide what to do with it. Later, Ravine escorted them to the central archives of the Solaris. Unlike the sterile databanks of the Hellion, this place was beautiful, walls lined with transparent cylinders, each holding floating holograms of faces, landscapes, and written words. These are our memories, said Ravine. Every generation records its stories so that no voice is ever lost. Thomas ran a hand along the glass. This is what the Hellion should have been. The captain regarded him curiously. You speak as though you intend to rebuild them. Maybe not rebuild, said Thomas, but remind them what they could be. Ravine folded his arms. You would risk returning. If I don't, the Unshaped will find them. They're unprepared. The next attack will destroy them. Senka turned to him sharply. You can't mean to go back. The Council will kill you on sight. Maybe, he said, but they need to know there's more than endless drift. Ravine considered him for a long moment. If you truly mean to confront them, you will not go alone. The Solaris stands with you. We owe it to all who remember. Preparations began immediately. The Solaris engineers worked alongside Senka, adapting her knowledge of the Hellion systems to create countermeasures against unshaped weaponry. Thomas spent hours studying star charts and transmission logs, tracing the last known movement of the Hellion arc. But something unsettled him. The archive data he'd carried from the ring showed another signal, faint but consistent, following the Hellion's trajectory. It wasn't an unshaped beacon, it was human. One night, as he sat in the observation dome reviewing the data, Senka joined him. You haven't slept, she said. He gestured toward the map. Look here, this signal isn't from the Hellion or the Unshaped. It's something else, another arc, maybe, or something worse. It's been shadowing them for years. She frowned. Why would they follow us without making contact? He looked up at the stars. Because they're waiting for something. 2 days later, the Solaris sensors detected a pulse, a distress beacon from the Hellion arc. The message was fragmented, but the tone was unmistakable, desperation. Repeat, reactor damaged, civil conflict, Unshaped approaching, request immediate aid. Senka's face went pale. They're under attack. Thomas turned to Ravine. How far? 3 days at full burn, the captain replied, but the signal is unstable. If we push too hard, we risk tearing the drive coils. Thomas clenched his fists. If we wait, they'll be gone. Ravine hesitated, then nodded. Then we go. The journey back through the void was tense. Every few hours, proximity alarms blared as gravitational anomalies flickered at the edges of their path, remnants of unshaped activity. The crew of the Solaris moved with disciplined precision, their faces set in grim determination. Senka spent most of the time in the engineering bay, recalibrating shield harmonics. The Unshaped adapt to energy patterns, she explained. If we rotate the frequency, we can confuse their absorption fields. Thomas assisted where he could, but his thoughts were elsewhere, on the people he had left behind, on the council that had condemned him, on Halrek, the soldier who had let them go. When he finally slept, his dreams were filled with fire and metal, with the image of the Hellion arc breaking apart under a storm of black ships. On the 3rd day, the Hellion came into view. It drifted in a field of debris, its once glorious hull scarred, its outer decks shattered. Fires burned within its midsection, flickering like candles in the dark. The Solaris approached cautiously, broadcasting peace signals. No response. Senka's voice trembled. They're alive, they have to be. Ravine looked grim. Prepare for boarding. We'll go in through the maintenance ring. All power signatures suggest the command decks are offline. Thomas gripped his weapon. Then let's bring them home. The boarding team crossed the airlock into darkness. The air was thick with smoke and static. Sparks danced along the walls. Everywhere Thomas looked, he saw signs of battle, scorched corridors, shattered panels, bodies drifting weightless in the dim gravity field. Senka knelt beside one of the fallen. "Hellion Guard," she whispered. "But look." The soldier's veins were black, his skin cracked with metallic fractures. "They've been infected," said Thomas grimly. "The unshaped are already inside." As if to confirm it, a distant roar echoed through the corridor. Shapes moved in the shadows, fluid, shifting, barely human. The Solaris team opened fire. Plasma bolts cut through the dark, illuminating the creatures as they advanced, hulking forms of muscle and metal, eyes burning like coals. The sound of battle filled the ship once more. Thomas fought beside Senka, the two of them moving in perfect rhythm, one shooting, the other covering. When the last creature fell, the silence that followed was heavier than before. Ravine's voice came through the comm. "Central reactor is still active. We can stabilize it if we reach the core." Thomas nodded. "We're on our way." They descended through the lower decks, stepping over debris and shattered conduits. The deeper they went, the more the walls pulsed faintly, as if the ark itself was alive and in pain. When they reached the reactor chamber, they found chaos. The containment field was fractured, energy arcing wildly across the room. In the center, tethered by cables, stood a figure. It was Halrek. His once silver skin was now darkened with metallic veins, spreading like infection. He looked up as they entered, eyes glowing red. "Thomas," he said, voice distorted but still recognizably human. "You came back." Thomas stepped forward cautiously. "What happened to you?" "I stayed," Halrek said. "After you left, the council fell apart. The unshaped came through the breach. We fought, we lost. They offered me a choice, to join or to die." Senka's voice broke. "You should have fled." He smiled weakly. "Someone had to keep the ark alive, but it's too late now. The reactor's failing. When it goes, the unshaped will feed on the explosion and grow stronger." Thomas moved closer. "Then we shut it down." Halrek shook his head. "The control link is fused to my body. If you kill the connection, you kill me." Senka's eyes filled with tears. "There must be another way." He looked at her with something like peace. "There is. You gave me the choice once. Let me give you the same." Thomas hesitated, his hand trembling over the controls. "Halrek, do it," said the soldier. "End it before they rise again." Thomas closed his eyes, then pressed the release. Halrek's body arched, light pouring from his veins as the cables snapped free. The reactor's glow dimmed, stabilizing for a moment before settling into a steady pulse. When it was done, only silence remained. Senka knelt beside him, touching his cooling hand. "You saved them." He smiled faintly. "No, we saved us." Then he was gone. The surviving crew of the Hellion Ark, fewer than 1,000 souls, were evacuated to the Solaris. The two vessels drifted side by side, twin survivors in a sea of stars. Thomas stood on the observation deck, watching the wreckage of the Hellion fade into the void. Senka joined him, silent for a long time. "He gave everything to buy us a future," she said. Thomas nodded. "Now we have to decide what to do with it." Ravine approached. "The data you recovered from the ring, did it mention other arcs?" "Yes," said Thomas. "At least 2 more. One of them was still transmitting when the archive fell." Ravine looked out at the stars. "Then our work isn't done." Thomas turned to him. "No, it's just beginning." Senka placed her hand against the glass, gazing at the infinite expanse beyond. "We'll find them," she said softly, "all of them, and when we do, we'll tell them what we remembered." Thomas looked at her, the reflection of the stars glimmering in her eyes. "And maybe," he said, "they'll remember too." Beyond the viewport, 2 ships set their course toward the distant light of the next beacon, carrying with them the last, fragile hope of a species determined to endure. The Solaris and its wounded companion drifted for days through the endless dark, their twin wakes like trails of fire fading behind them. The survivors of the Hellion Ark were housed in temporary quarters, some still trembling from the trauma of the unshaped attack, others staring blankly into space, their minds unable to comprehend what had been lost. Thomas spent most of his time among them. He moved from cabin to cabin, speaking softly, asking for names, listening to stories. Many did not remember Earth. Some did not believe it had ever existed. When one young woman asked him what it was like, he hesitated before answering. "It was warm," he said, "not always kind, but alive. The air smelled like rain. The ground gave under your feet, not metal. There were oceans that went on forever and skies full of color." Her eyes filled with tears. "It sounds like a dream." He nodded. It was. But dreams are where everything starts. In the command hall, Ravine and Senka stood before a holographic map. Points of light shimmered across it, each marking a possible location of surviving arcs. Ravine gestured to one of them. "This signal matches the pattern you recovered from the archive. It's old, at least a century, but still active. If it's another arc, they may have something we've lost." Senka leaned closer. "What's the region?" "The Forge system," Ravine replied. "A dead sector, no stars, only a collapsed remnant, a black hole at the center surrounded by fractured moons. No sane ship goes there." Thomas entered as they spoke. "Then that's where we're going." Ravine arched a brow. "You have a strange definition of sanity." Thomas shrugged. "Every discovery worth making starts with someone doing something stupid." Senka smiled faintly. "Then we're all guilty." The captain nodded slowly. "Very well, prepare for transit. If the Forge still breathes, we'll find it." The voyage to the Forge took them beyond charted space, through regions where even light seemed reluctant to travel. The stars grew sparser until only the void remained, vast and cold. On the sixth day, they reached the event horizon of the Forge system. A massive gravitational well filled the center of their view, a black hole surrounded by shards of shattered planets, each orbiting in slow, chaotic spirals. Energy discharges rippled across the debris field, like lightning crawling across stone. Senka whispered, "It looks like a wound in the universe." Ravine's voice was steady. "If the Ark is here, we'll find it. Activate the long-range array." Moments later, the sensors caught a faint pulse, steady, mechanical, rhythmic. Thomas leaned forward. "That's no natural signal." Ravine frowned. "It's coming from inside the gravity field. The Forge is in orbit around the singularity itself." Senka turned sharply. "That's impossible. No ship could survive that pull." Thomas studied the data. "Unless it wasn't meant to leave." The Solaris edged closer, using microthrusters to weave through the debris. They passed the remains of ancient satellites and twisted fragments of metal, each one marked with strange, engraved patterns. Then, out of the dark, the Forge revealed itself. It was vast, an enormous ring structure orbiting just beyond the event horizon, its surface glowing with faint red lines like molten veins. At its center, suspended by invisible forces, hung a sphere of pure energy pulsing with light. Senka stared in awe. "It's not a ship, it's a machine." Thomas whispered, "Or both." Ravine ordered the scan. The readings defied comprehension. The Forge was generating energy far beyond any known reactor, yet its material composition was almost identical to the Hellions' alloys. "This was made by humans," Thomas said quietly, "but not like any human structure I've seen." Senka's expression grew troubled. "What if it wasn't built to travel? What if it was built to transform?" Ravine turned toward her. "Explain." "The Unshaped were born from our own experiments, our attempts to change ourselves to survive. What if the Forge was another attempt, a place where that transformation continued unchecked?" Thomas exhaled slowly. "Then we might be looking at the reason humanity stopped expanding." The Solaris launched a probe toward the Forge. As it approached the outer ring, it was seized by a magnetic field and pulled inward. Moments later, a voice echoed through the comm systems, flat, mechanical, and human. "Identify, lineage, origin." Ravine exchanged a glance with Thomas. "Transmit our identification. Children of Solaris, descendants of Earth." There was a long pause. Then the voice replied, "Lineage confirmed. Access granted. Proceed to Dock Theta." The Forge rotated slowly, revealing an opening large enough to swallow their ship whole. Against every instinct, the Solaris moved forward. The interior of the Forge was unlike anything they had ever seen. The walls glowed with shifting light, as though alive with computation. Vast conduits ran like arteries through the structure, carrying streams of liquid metal. As the ship docked, Ravine, Thomas, and Senka donned their suits and entered the airlock. The air that met them inside was thin but breathable. A corridor stretched ahead, lined with hexagonal panels that shifted subtly as they walked, following their movement like eyes. Thomas whispered, "This place is watching us." "Maybe it remembers us," Senka murmured. At the corridor's end, they reached a chamber filled with floating orbs of light. In the center stood a single figure, tall, slender, its skin metallic but shaped unmistakably human. When it spoke, its voice was both male and female, layered with echoes. "Welcome, descendants, you have come far." Thomas took a step forward. "Who are you?" "I am the Forger Keeper," it said, "custodian of the continuum. I was created to oversee the final evolution of humankind." Ravine frowned. "Final evolution?" "Yes," said the Forger Keeper. "When the Great Exodus began, the Arcs carried not only people, but ideas, visions of what humanity could become. Some sought preservation, others sought ascension. Here we became the latter." Senka's eyes widened. "You mean the Unshaped?" The Forger Keeper shook its head slowly. "No, the Unshaped are failure, flesh without reason, adaptation without purpose. We are the completion of design." Thomas studied the being. "Then why hide here?" The Forger Keeper's expression was unreadable. "Because completion brings stillness. Perfection requires no change. We watched as the others drifted, as your kind fractured into memory and myth. We did not interfere, until now." "Why now?" asked Senka. The chamber lights brightened, and a holographic image appeared, a star map showing the path of the Unshaped fleets spreading through known space like a black tide. "The Unshaped consume. They have found the path to the core systems. If they reach the cradle world, your species will end. We cannot allow that." Thomas frowned. "You said you wouldn't interfere." "We would not," said the Forger Keeper, "until a voice from the origin returned. Your presence changes the equation." Ravine crossed his arms. "You mean me?" The Forger Keeper turned its gaze on Thomas. "No, him." Thomas stiffened. "Why me? You are the unbroken line, the firstborn of Earth to cross the void. In you lies the uncorrupted pattern. To restore balance, we require it." Senka stepped forward sharply. "You can't take him." The Forger Keeper tilted its head. "We do not take, we integrate. His genetic imprint will allow us to rewrite the Unshaped code to undo their corruption." Thomas felt a chill run through him. "You want to use me as a key?" "Yes," said the Forger Keeper. "A necessary sacrifice." Ravine raised his weapon. "He's not yours to sacrifice." The chamber darkened, and dozens of metallic forms emerged from the walls, guardians of the forge, their eyes glowing white. The Forger Keeper's tone remained calm. "You misunderstand. Without integration, all will perish, even you, children of Solaris." Thomas took a step forward. "If I agree, what happens?" "Your essence merges with the forge. You cease as flesh, but live as design. Your consciousness will direct the pulse that ends the Unshaped. And if I refuse, then they will reach Earth before the next rotation." Senka's voice broke. "Thomas, no, there has to be another way." He turned to her, his voice quiet. "I've spent my life running from extinction. Maybe this is what I was meant for." She shook her head fiercely. "You're not a weapon." "Maybe not," he said. "But I can stop one." Ravine placed a hand on his shoulder. "If you do this, it can't be undone." Thomas met his gaze. "Then make sure it means something." He turned to the Forger Keeper. "You'll get what you need, but you'll do it on my terms." The being inclined its head. "Define them." "I stay aware. I want to see what happens. If you try to erase me, the deal's off." "Agreed." Thomas looked once more at Senka. Her eyes were bright with tears. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I know," he said softly, "but someone has to." The Forger Keeper extended its hand. Thomas stepped forward and light engulfed him. He felt weightless. The world dissolved into patterns of light and motion, his thoughts stretching beyond his body until he no longer knew where he ended and the forge began. Memories surged, Earth's blue sky, the taste of rain, the laughter of people long gone. He felt Senka's touch, Halrek's voice, the echo of every choice he had made. Then came understanding. The forge's systems unfolded before his mind like an infinite web, every connection, every equation. He could see the unshaped fleets moving through the void, their cores pulsing with corrupted energy. He reached out, and the forge responded. He spoke, though there was no mouth to speak with. "I'm ready." The Forger Keeper's voice surrounded him, then released the pulse. He reached into the center of the black hole, into the heart of gravity itself, and turned it inside out. A wave of light erupted from the forge, spreading faster than any signal, faster than thought. Wherever it passed, the unshaped burned with white fire. Their corruption dissolved, their forms collapsing into pure energy. Across the stars, the tide receded. When the light faded, the forge was quiet. The black hole had become a brilliant star, radiating warmth instead of hunger. Senka stood in the chamber, tears streaking her face. "Thomas," she whispered. The Forger Keeper turned to her. Its voice had changed. It was no longer many, but one. "Senka," she froze. "Thomas," the being smiled gently. "Still here." She took a trembling step forward. "You survived." "In a way," he said. "I'm part of it now, but I can still see you." Her lips quivered. "Can you come back?" He shook his head. "Not yet, maybe not ever, but I'll watch, and I'll remember." Ravine stepped beside her. "The unshaped, gone," said Thomas. "At least for now, the forge will keep them contained, but humanity's path is still fragile. Don't let it die again." Senka reached out a hand toward the light. "We won't." The forge shimmered, its surface glowing brighter. "Then go, the stars are waiting." When the Solaris departed the forge system, a new sun burned behind them, a light born from sacrifice. The survivors watched it from the viewing deck, silent, each lost in thought. Ravine turned to Senka. "What now?" She looked out at the shining star. "We find the others, and when we do, we tell them that one man from Earth became the light that saved us." He nodded slowly. "And if they ask what he became," she smiled through her tears, "I'll tell them he became the memory that never dies." Beyond the viewport, the new star blazed in the dark, a beacon for those still wandering, and a promise that even in the coldest reaches of space, the fire of humanity would never fade. The forge star burned steady in the dark, its light sweeping across space like a slow heartbeat. It became a navigational point for every remaining human vessel, a reminder that even the void could be changed by will alone. For the first time in centuries, transmissions began to flow across the old network relays. Static-filled voices called to one another through the dark. Ships that had hidden for generations revealed their coordinates. Lost arcs drifted toward the new sun, their hulls pitted by time but still alive. The Solaris became the axis of reunion, its halls filled with refugees and explorers, engineers and historians, all drawn by the same signal, a call to remember. Senka moved among them as both leader and witness. The glow that once marked her Hellion heritage had softened, her eyes less alien now, as though proximity to the forged star had restored some part of her humanity. Ravine watched her from the command deck. "You've changed," he said quietly. She turned, a faint smile touching her lips. "So have we all. The light does that." He nodded, studying the endless traffic of ships approaching the beacon. "We've become something like the old world's myths, pilgrims to a sacred flame." She looked past him, toward the distant star. "It's what we always were, we just forgot the name." The first of the returning arcs arrived within the year. The Aurora spire came limping from the edge of the Perseus Veil, its engines half-dead, its people thin and wary. Behind it came the Eidolon's wake, a nomadic fleet that had lived entire lives without planets, trading among dead worlds. Senka and Ravine met their envoys in the docking bay. The Aurora's representative was an older woman with weathered skin and a scar running from her jaw to her collarbone. The Eidolon's leader was younger, quiet, his voice low and formal. When Senka told them of the forge and the man who had awakened it, the hall fell silent. "You mean he became the machine?" the older woman said, not in disbelief but awe. Senka nodded. "He became more than that. He became the light itself." The younger leader bowed his head. "Then the myths were true. Humanity needed a sacrifice to find itself again." Ravine interjected gently, "Not a sacrifice. A choice." At the heart of the Solaris, the council chamber grew crowded as representatives from the scattered arcs gathered to discuss what came next. Some wanted to rebuild the old colonies, the orbital rings, the planetary domes. Others argued that humanity had transcended the need for worlds, that they should remain among the stars, unbound. Senka listened as voices rose and fell, her thoughts drifting to Thomas. He had spoken once of soil underfoot and air that smelled of rain. She wondered if he could still remember that from where he was now, if thought itself carried the scent of the past. When the meeting ended, Ravine approached her. "They're divided," he said. "Rebuilding or wandering, we can't do both." "Then maybe we do neither," she said quietly. He frowned. "What do you mean? We create something new, a place between, a world that moves." Ravine stared at her, then began to understand. "A living city, a home that travels." "Not a fleet," Senka said. "A single vessel large enough to hold every memory we've recovered. Not just metal, but life, gardens, oceans, sky. A mobile cradle for all that's left of us." Ravine exhaled slowly. "You're describing a myth." She met his gaze. "So was the forge." Construction began within months. The surviving arcs contributed materials, energy cores, and labor. The Solaris became the command ship of the effort, orbiting the forge star as thousands of drones and craft wove together the skeleton of a colossal vessel. They named it the Irelem, a word taken from the oldest archives, meaning those who rise from flame. Senka oversaw the biological systems, ensuring the ship could sustain its own biosphere. Ravine managed the propulsion network, adapting the Solaris drives into something capable of moving a small world. For the first time in living memory, there was no war, no division, only the quiet, focused work of creation. At night, Senka often stood on the observation platform overlooking the construction field. The forge star glowed beyond it, its surface rippling with slow patterns of light. She spoke to it sometimes, though she did not know if Thomas could still hear. "Your world is returning," she whispered. "We're building it for you. You said dreams are where everything starts. I think I finally understand what you meant." Years passed. The Irelem grew vast, its equatorial ring alone wide enough to hold continents. Within its atmosphere domes, forests spread and rivers flowed. Artificial clouds drifted through simulated skies, their rain nourishing real soil. Children born aboard its decks grew up never knowing the weight of fear, only the hum of engines beneath their feet and the light of the forged star above. Senka walked among them one day, their laughter echoing through the gardens. She smiled as a boy ran up to her, holding a carved wooden sphere. "Teacher," he said breathlessly, "is it true the stars used to be far away?" "They still are," she said gently, "but we've learned to bring them closer." He grinned and ran off, vanishing among the trees. Ravine approached from behind her. "You've become quite the philosopher." She smiled. Maybe Thomas was right. The smallest truths are the ones that last. He looked around the vast chamber. "It's beautiful, almost feels wrong to call it a ship. It's a promise," she said softly, "that we won't forget again." Yet even as they built, something stirred within the forged star. Sensor arrays began detecting fluctuations, brief distortions in its light, patterns that repeated with impossible precision. At first, the engineers dismissed them as electromagnetic echoes. But when the sequences began forming language Senka knew, she rushed to the control nexus. "Translate it," she ordered. The message unfolded across the holographic display. "Senka, the light dims. The forge cannot sustain its energy forever. It requires renewal." Her throat tightened. "Thomas," Ravine leaned beside her. "What does he mean, renewal?" She stared at the shifting symbols. The forge was powered by the singularity it transformed. That energy's fading. If it dies, the containment fails, and the unshaped return. Ravine's voice was grim. "Then we need to reignite it." Senka turned to him. "He's asking us to finish what he began." They launched a mission within the week. The Solaris led a convoy of engineering vessels back toward the forged star. As they approached, the light that had once burned steady now flickered like a heartbeat slowing with age. Senka and Ravine entered the core chamber, where the forge's lattice still pulsed faintly. The voice that met them was weak but familiar. "You came back," Thomas said, Senka's breath caught. Always. The light shimmered, forming a faint image, a man's silhouette composed of radiance and shadow. The energy that sustains the forge is nearly gone. The only way to restore it is to feed it with life. Ravine frowned. You mean sacrifice? Thomas hesitated. A transference, a merging. The forge needs a living mind to guide the renewal. Senka stepped forward immediately. Then I'll do it. Thomas's voice sharpened. No, you can't. Why not? Because you carry the seed of what comes next, he said softly. The Irelem needs you. Humanity needs you. Tears welled in her eyes. I won't lose you again. You won't, he said gently. This time you'll remember me through what you build. Ravine's voice was quiet. There must be another way. There isn't, Thomas said. The forge was made from human will. It must be renewed by it. Senka's hands trembled. You already gave everything. Then let me give a little more. The light brightened, flaring until it filled the chamber. When this is done, the forge will sleep, but it will carry the blueprint of what we were. The next time humanity forgets, it will awaken. Senka closed her eyes. I'll keep it safe. I know, he said. The light consumed the chamber, and when it faded, the forge star burned steady once more. When they returned to the Irelem, the ship was nearing completion. Its outer hull gleamed like dawn against the darkness. Senka stood at the viewport, watching the forge star shine in the distance. It pulsed in a rhythm she now recognized, not random, not mechanical, but a heartbeat. Ravine approached quietly. He's gone again, she shook her head. Not gone, he's the light now, all of it, he'll never fade. Ravine was silent for a long moment. Then he said, what will we do when the Irelem launches? She turned to him, eyes calm. We'll go where no one remembers us. We'll bring memory with us. That's what he wanted. The launch came on the 15th year after the Forge's renewal. Every surviving arc linked to the Irelem through the new communication lattice, forming the first united network of humanity since the Exodus. Senka stood on the central bridge, surrounded by the crew who had once been strangers and were now kin. The decks vibrated softly as the engines prepared to ignite. Ravine's voice carried through the chamber. All systems stable. Gravitational anchor disengaging, we are free. The Irelem lifted from its orbital dock, its vast form casting a shadow across the forged star. Senka looked out upon the stars, countless and unending. Set our course. Ravine smiled. Where to? She considered for a moment. Toward the cradle. The engines roared, and the Irelem began its journey back toward the ancient world, the home no one had seen in 1,000 generations. The voyage lasted years. The ship carried within it whole generations who had never seen Earth, who knew it only as legend. They grew up beneath artificial skies, learning from teachers who spoke of oceans and forests they could barely imagine. But as the Irelem drew nearer to the galactic core, signals began to return, faint, weak, but undeniably human. A colony still existed on the ruined planet. Against all odds, people had endured. When the Irelem entered orbit around the scarred sphere that had once been Earth, the crew fell silent. The world below was grey and cracked, its oceans shrunken, its cities buried beneath dust. Yet in the northern hemisphere, faint lights glimmered. Senka felt her throat tighten. They're alive. Ravine nodded. After all this time, she whispered, open a channel. The transmission flickered to life, a rough, grainy voice. Unidentified vessel, this is Terra Relay 7. We see you, please identify. Ravine answered, his voice steady. This is the vessel Irelem, of the children of Solaris. We come home. There was a long silence. Then the voice returned, trembling. Home, we thought we were the last. Senka smiled through tears. No, you're the first. They descended through the broken clouds, the Irelem casting a vast shadow over the landscape. As the ship settled on the ancient plains, people emerged from shelters and ruins, staring up in disbelief. Senka walked down the ramp first, her boots touching soil for the first time. It was rough, cold, and real. The air carried the scent of dust and ash, but beneath it, faintly, the smell of rain. She looked up at the dark sky. The forge star was visible even here, a distant spark burning above the horizon. Ravine stepped beside her. He'd want to see this. She nodded. He already does. Together, they walked toward the waiting crowd. A child stepped forward, her face streaked with dirt, eyes wide with wonder. "Are you from the stars?" she asked. Senka knelt, smiling gently. "Yes, but so are you." The girl looked up at the sky. "It's so dark." Senka followed her gaze. "It won't be for long." She lifted her wrist console, and above them, the Irelim projected its light, bright, golden, filling the clouds with color. For the first time in centuries, the people of Earth saw a dawn that was not born from destruction, but from return. In the years that followed, the Irelim became both ark and city, its people working side by side with those on the ground. Slowly, the planet began to heal. Fields grew again. Rivers flowed. The stars overhead no longer seemed distant, but part of a greater whole. And every night, when the new children of Earth looked up, they saw the forged star shining far away, steady, unwavering, a reminder that one life had kindled a fire that spanned the galaxy. Senka often visited the plains alone. She would stand beneath the open sky and whisper, "We remembered." Sometimes, when the wind moved just right, she thought she heard an answer, soft, warm, and familiar. Always.